Let me introduce myself. My name is Cody Norman. I'm the Applications Engineering Manager with SnapNrack. My team works on the technical training requirements with our customers. We manage the technical collateral that supports the SnapNrack product line, and work closely with our sales team on onboarding new customers, rolling out new products to existing customers. I work closely with our product development team, kind of as a conduit from our installer customers back to the team that's working on the research and development of the new products, to make sure that what we're producing, what we're investing our time and money in, is going to result in a product that not only our customers are going to appreciate, but is going to drive growth with our customers, so that we can continue to grow as a team and continue to grow the industry. We also have Bill Brooks in attendance here, and I've asked him to sit up front and be a resource for some of the more finer detail questions, or maybe some future-looking questions about what the code may do and the code may evolve versus what we are going to be talking about from its current stance today. So Bill, I appreciate you being here for that. Bill's part of the Brooks Engineering. He does consultation on PV code compliance for all facets. And actually, following this presentation, he's going to be doing I think a 3-hour session on National Electric Code and the different requirements that have come up from the more recent versions of the NEC. In addition to that, I think Bill's very active participant in the standards committees that put together a lot of the different code requirements that are coming out in the new issues of the IBC, the UL standards, and all that. So it will be a good resource having him available here. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about regarding the fire code compliance is going to be more specific to California, because of California's the CBC, California Building Code, adopting the 2012 International Building Code. But I think it is pretty safe to say that the adoption of the 2012 IBC and its requirements with PV mounting systems is going to be more widely adopted throughout the US. So for those of you not operating in California, I think this is still a really good session to get an idea of what's going to be coming in the next 1 to 3 years as the code cycles get updated. Course agenda today: do an overview of SnapNrack, the company, the products that we have, do an overview of UL 2703, integrated grounding and bonding, the fire classification, what documentation there is supporting these UL standards, and then close with a questions and answer session. So, SnapNrack, not just a great name. We started in about 2008, and we were a team that started in REC Solar, engineers, installers, kind of looking for an improvement to the status quo of what we're using for a mounting system product, and with some key opportunities, took it upon us to develop a system that was, had some features and benefits that really improved the process. Some of the key things that came out in 2008 with the original product lines were rail channels that supported wire management, snap-in functionality, hence the name SnapNrack, versus sliding your module attachment hardware from one end of a 15-foot long rail into the middle and making sure that you count. Was it 22 or 21, or did I put 20 in? A snap-in feature to prevent that type of headache. And overall, looking at driving down the installation cost. And I think that that's a pretty key area that we'll be talking about today, is looking at this from an overall installation cost versus just a pure product cost of how much do the racking parts and pieces cost to manufacture, distribute, and then purchase from our installers. But what are the features and benefits that actually are making it easier for your installers to use the product, get it on the roof, and get off faster and move on to the next project. So SnapNrack's background is, wholly embedded in that philosophy of reducing the installation costs and making it easier for our installer customers to continue growing their companies and putting more solar on. Our focus, performance of the product. Obviously, it has to meet the 20, 25, 30, 50, 100-year operating life of these PV systems. I guess we'll find out what that actually turns out in the next couple decades. Heavily focused on aesthetics. This is going on a roof of somebody that owns a house, and they are extremely concerned about, what is in and around and on their house, and something as a focal point as on their roof is still a major concern. So, all of our products have the aesthetic function of that component as a main feature. And obviously, as I mentioned, the cost reduction in order to just reduce the overall life cycle cost of the system. Thousands of installations, the majority of the installations being residential as far as quantity is concerned, but a very significant amount of commercial application deployed as well. Our main focus right now is going to be continuing with our residential product lines, residential solutions. But all together combined, we have over 350 megawatts of installed SnapNrack products since 2008. Installations in all 50 states, and we currently have certifications, structural engineering letters for all 50 states as well, because we continue to support the entire US. North America, Caribbean, we have a decent amount of SnapNrack deployed in Puerto Rico and are currently supporting that area as well. National network of distributors. A lot of you are already SnapNrack users, but for those of you that are not, it is available in your area, and we have a distribution network that is available to support you with next day delivery. Final key there, focus on product innovation. Because of our direct access to installers, the kind of core background of SnapNrack coming from the installers, from the engineers that were working in the solar industry, we are continually looking at what we can do to innovate our products and make them better than they were yesterday, and handle a pretty volatile and changing solar industry landscape. So, 2703 overview. Quick show of hands on who is familiar with 2703 and who has not heard of it at all before. One. That's good. Hopefully we can educate those of you that know a little bit about it, and it should be a good course for those of you that haven't heard anything. So 2703 is sort of a subset of the larger UL 1703, and its focus is on specifically the mounting systems for retention of flat plate solar collectors and the grounding systems that are associated with it. I'm not going to read that there, but that's the actual title of the standard. So 3 main components. The first component is the integrated grounding bonding. The second component is fire classification, and the third is mechanical loading. So respectively, your 2703 listing would certify all metallic components are part of a listed ground path that's going to be able to handle a ground fault and return all that potential to earth, and that everything is adequately bonded. For the fire classification, you'd be certifying that roof-mounted systems have achieved a fire rating, and when this mounting system and module are installed as a specific system based on the module type and the mounting system classification. And finally, a little bit less definition, and we won't be going into it too much, the mechanical loading part of 2703. Basically, the verbiage in 2703 is giving you guidance on what the requirements are for a licensed engineer to be reviewing the product in order to stay code compliant. So what's the purpose of the UL listing? And this is from the manufacturer's perspective. This is not from UL's perspective, the code committees or anything like that, where The purpose is, general public safety, putting together a standard that manufacturers and contractors have to comply with in order to have a system that, meets the AHJ requirements. From the manufacturer perspective, why would SnapNrack invest in this testing, this certification? We're looking for industry-leading safety and quality. The contractors that are purchasing our products and installing it, have the assurance that the system that they have purchased has been tested by a third-party agency and actually will function and operate as we specify that it will. And this is specifically around electrical grounding and fire classification. So two features that are very prone to homeowner safety. So having that assurance that this third party has evaluated it is obviously a pretty key feature and something that you can use as a sales point as well. But the meat there, installation cost reductions. Integrated grounding provides a significant cost reduction because you're no longer purchasing a large amount of bare copper wire, ground lugs, bonding each module together manually. It means that the structural components of the mounting system are actually also the grounding components as well, and that's a significant labor savings, a significant material cost savings. And for those of you on the operations side, reduction in SKUs. Obviously, it's going to be less types of bare copper wire, less ground lugs, all of that. It's the same components that you were purchasing previously that were just providing a mechanical attachment for your modules to the mounting system are now also your electrical grounding components. So 10 SKUs instead of 20, that's pretty big. So keynotes on integrated grounding and bonding. Like I mentioned before, the mounting system components themselves are what are providing that bond path. The way that SnapNrack achieves that is we have stainless steel bonding pins that are embedded into the parts. Here is one of our, demonstrated splice bars. And my laser's dying here, but at the ends of the bar is embedded stainless steel bonding pins, and they're actually deforming the aluminum when you torque the bolts, and that's what's providing the bite that you get to provide electrical continuity. Having this listing supersedes the requirements for any additional grounding. Regardless of what might have been required from your AHJ, this is now the listing that they should be conforming to. Yeah, question here. Great question. So question was, is there a certain amount of times you can loosen and re-tighten the splice bar and still have it provide a ground path? It depends on your grounding component. A lot of you will be familiar with ground washers that have a material that dents in. So that is usually a one-time use only. The SnapNrack components, with the way that they are deforming the aluminum instead of deforming the stainless steel, means that they can be reused and tightened and untightened and retightened, and there is no limit to how many times they've been tightened it. So yeah, SnapNrack components have no limit to the quantity of times that they can be tightened and then uninstalled. Makes sense. So yeah, the proper installation of the splice bar and the tolerances that we have on our rail definitely mean that the installers that are putting it together need to know how to do it, because it can be misused, as a lot of different parts are when it comes to a tight tolerance system. But the point is there is not a limit. Now, like I mentioned before, because those stainless steel bonding pins are actually deforming the aluminum that they're biting into, you're going to have, it's going to, deform that channel. So you don't want to tighten, loosen too much, or else you're going to be kind of getting a funny edge on there. Not that it's going to impact the electrical bonding, but it's just going to make it a little bit tougher to install. Final note here, this is a listed system. I mean, these connection points have been all evaluated by UL, and UL has said that this system together, installed per the manufacturer's installation manual, is now a listed component. The whole system is listed. Previously, you were installing listed components together in a manner that they were intended to be installed, but ultimately it was a set of components that were independently evaluated. This is evaluated all together. So there's just kind of an extra level of assurance that the system is going to be operating as intended. All right, compliance best practices. So I definitely want to take a little bit time on here, and if anybody has any questions, address them here, because this is going to be how you get the value out of the UL listing or the products that you're purchasing. This is how you streamline the permitting process, streamline the inspection process, is following these best practices. First and foremost, install per the manual. If you have practices that you like to use, whether or not it was how the product was intended for, that's great, but your inspectors, your plan checkers, are going to be looking to confirm that the system has been installed per the requirements of the manual or it is not compliant. The parts and pieces may be structurally fine, but they have to be installed per the manual or they're not going to be meeting this UL listing. The install manual is, it's the basis, it's how UL kind of controls this. So if it wasn't included in the manual, or maybe it was a way that you were installing it previously and it's not anymore, it might be specifically because UL has said that this doesn't provide a correct ground path, or this doesn't provide the fire mitigation that's necessary to maintain the fire rating that the system has. So make sure, and this is a bit tougher, especially for those of you that are involved in the logistics and the operations side of the business, the warehousing side, inventory levels, but you need to make sure that all the components that go out are part of the grounding system, the UL listed system. If you are installing the mid clamps and end clamps, and they have the bonding pins in there, and they're providing the continuity from the rail to the module frames and back, but you're not using the splice kits that have the bonding pins in them, the system is not UL listed. It has to be all of the correct components or it doesn't meet that certification requirement. This is easy to see when you have components that might have these bonding pins installed, but it might not be that easy to see when some components may differ only by the material finish. Previously, SnapNrack might have had a clear anodization on an aluminum part, and in order to get that continuity and the reduced resistance between mating surfaces, we might have made that a mill finish part. So SnapNrack's master price list, the AEE catalog spells out pretty clearly what parts are part of our bonding product portfolio and what parts are part of the UL listed assemblies. So if this is what you're trying to do, if you're trying to get the integrated grounding functionality, make sure that all the pieces that you're installing on that project fall into that category. Finally, update your permit packages. A lot of you were using Wiley's Weeb projects for a long time. They promoted much quicker installation and were an inexpensive way to get that ground path and reduce the manual grounding of each module. But those products are not part of the SnapNrack UL listed system. So if your designs show all the details with mid clamps and end clamps with the Weeb product on it, and your inspectors get out on site and they see that and they see how the system has no weaves, you're probably not going to pass. And it's not going to be because you installed the system incorrectly, it's because your permit package and your design documentation doesn't match the installed system. Yeah, so the tilt kit system sold by SnapNrack is part of the listing and it has passed all the integrated grounding testing. Any other questions? Yeah, great question. So a lot of the resources that you'll be looking for in order to put together a code compliant design package are going to be available on the SnapNrack website. And under our resources tab, there is a tab called system drawings. And if you just click on the resources tab, it gives you kind of an overview of everything that's available. But SnapNrack has published all of the pages that would apply to different roof attachment products, to different systems, and all of the verbiage has been updated to conform with the integrated grounding requirements. So that's kind of the basis. We also have some grounding details that are specific to, showing how these stainless steel bonding pins work for the splice bar. They work for the module mid clamps and the ground lug as well. Yeah. So yeah, the AHJ's building department's requirement for a wet stamp can be handled in a couple of ways. Typically what they're requiring isn't just necessarily a wet stamp, but a site-specific review. And if a site-specific review is required, SnapNrack has professional engineers that are very familiar with the product and can provide those services. In fact, Norm Shield Structural Engineering provided the 50 state structural engineering packets that we currently post today. If those aren't accepted, which give the total limiting guidelines from 0 PSF, 250 PSF snow load, 110 to 150 mile an hour wind loads. If your jurisdiction requires a site-specific review of this is the exact condition I'm looking for, we can of course refer you to Norm Shield and he'll be able to provide you with structural engineering specific to that project. Or we can connect your structural engineers with those that are more familiar with it, and you can get that as well. Marking and labeling. This is extremely important because this is how you identify what parts and pieces are part of the UL listed system. 2703 requires that the smallest unit packaging bears the UL label. Not necessarily that each part and piece requires a stamp or some sort of a UL label affixed to it. This would be similar to how wire nuts are currently labeled, where the smallest unit packaging that they are shipped in bears that UL logo. But in order for this to be an effective means of an inspector confirming that this is part of a UL listed system, they need that packaging on site at the time of the inspection. This one I can't stress enough, so I'll repeat myself. Smallest unit packaging bearing the UL label should be available on site at the time of the inspection. If you had a 10 kW system and let's say these weren't end clamps, these were mid clamps, and you had 6 bags of mid clamps, I can't guarantee that all 6 bags won't be necessary at the time of the inspection, but I think at least a representative smallest unit package for each of the components that you use to install the system will be required by the inspector. So this is important to reinforce with your installers or whoever's going to be attending these inspections for you. Ground lugs. A lot of the mounting system manufacturers now have a ground lug that might be specific to their system. SnapNrack is one. We have a ground lug that has been stamped with a GR label. This is actually the one component that requires a mechanical stamping in order to identify it as a grounding component. So you'll notice on ours we have a GR, ground, grounding, all of those are allowed by UL. But this will specifically need to be shown to the inspectors at the time of the inspection. So whether that's pulling up a panel, probably a pretty common requirement, or at least having one representative ground lug available to show this is it, and it's installed 1 per row in order to bond the system together per the installation manual. Yeah. Sure, great question. The question was, what is the ground lug requirement? What are the quantities needed? So for the SnapNrack system, it is 1 ground lug required per row. So that's 1 per 2 rails typically. But again, if you weren't using SnapNrack, you should be conforming to the installation manual that might require 3 ground lugs per rail, per row, who knows? Just make sure it's in compliance. Final note here. The installation manual is required to bear the UL label. Keep that manual on site for the same purposes that you're keeping the packaging on site so that the inspector can use it to confirm conformance to the manual, conformance to the listing. like I said before, UL uses installation manuals as a basis for control, and that's exactly how the inspectors are going to be perceiving this as well. Everything has to be controlled per the installation manual. So here's just a rendering representation of a SnapNrack UL listed system. I'll just give a highlight of the components here, and these are all the major components that are going to be providing the ground path for the system, and then we'll move on to the fire classification part. So our end clamps here, these are the X end clamps. Part of the reason of the kind of funny X shape is so that you can snap it into the rail the same as you're able to snap in the rest of our components. Mid clamps, this is going to be a key point that your inspectors are looking for, since the mid clamps are providing the bonding path from the module to the rail, and they're kind of the most frequently used part. So packaging representative components and understanding of how the mid clamp works, that's going to be key to streamlining the inspection process. Pretty similar notes about the splice kit as well. Have one on site that's not installed so that you don't have to uninstall part of the system to show the inspector how these stainless steel bonding pins work. Our ground lug here, and you can see attaching to the equipment ground. A roof attachment kit, this is showing our L-foot kit. UL 2703 was recently published as a standard. Up until a couple weeks ago, it had existed as an outline of investigation, and in the time for when it was first published as an outline in 2013, up until as it exists today as a published standard, there has been changes to the requirements for flashings and roof attachments as far as the integrated grounding testing is required. So SnapNrack's current systems for the Series 100 have been tested and listed to UL 2703 for integrated grounding, but for those of you that wouldn't be using or using a different racking manufacturer, they might have a different stance, or they might identify which parts and pieces of the racking system are part of the integrated grounding requirements and which parts aren't, and at least which parts are listed and not listed. If you are using parts that are listed and not listed, the manufacturer kind of needs to publish why, and that it isn't an impact to the integrated grounding requirements that would be specified by UL. Is that a good enough answer about that, Bill? Yeah. Final parts here, our universal end clamp. This would be used on the end of the array in order to attach to the bottom lip of the modules and provide a flush cut to the rail so that you would hide the feature. And finally, our bonding channel nut. This is the channel nut that's sliding in the rail channel and providing that ground path for most of the components. Fire classification. 2012 IBC has new requirements. Oh, sorry, question. Yeah, so SnapNrack makes the Series 200 system, ground mount application, that also meets the integrated grounding requirements and is UL listed. That includes the pipe fitting components for the space frame structure, 1.5" Galvy pipe, as well as the mating components from the pipe to the rail, and then basically all the same module attachment components that I just showed you. We do. The Series 200 UL installation manual is available online in the same location as our 100 UL installation manual. Fire classification. 2012 IBC has clarified that the PV systems need to be evaluated as a system, not as a module, not as a mounting product, but together. So the requirements are that this system now needs to have a fire rating standard. Historically, there's a high severity fire zones. In California, a lot of those are listed as WUIs, wildland urban interfaces, and that in these areas, a roof has to have a Class A rating. These high severity fire zones, I believe, exist outside California as well. It's just a more prominent requirement here. But you are allowed to install Class C rated solar panels on a Class A, Class B rated roof. Moving forward, the 2012 IBC is requiring that the classification of the roofing material on the roof cannot, the PV system classification cannot be lower than that. It cannot propagate a flame any worse than the existing roofing material. So a Class A being the best, the most flame retardant, you would have to have a Class A system. If you had a Class B roof, you would have to have a Class A or Class B PV system, and so forth. So California has adopted the 2012 IBC in January 2014, but they actually delayed the adoption of requiring the UL 1703 because there just weren't industry solutions at the time. And I think that this was, evaluating both the nationally recognized test labs as well as the manufacturers and product availability. So in that delay, that time has passed, and as of January 1st of this year, it is very widely adopted that PV systems require a fire classification, and that fire classification of the PV system meets or exceeds the fire classification of the existing roof. So the mounting system manufacturers are working with the module manufacturers and kind of leading this system level approach where they take a module manufacturer's type tested module, and along with the mounting system configurations shown in the installation manuals, they'll test and determine what the overall PV system fire rating is. So this requires that the module manufacturers have gone through the UL type testing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that right here. So the type testing, there's types 1 through 15. Types 1, 2, and 3 represent a change in the module construction, basically the backsheet requirements. And you can see here, this is kind of a simplified version of the table listed in 1703. But the types 1, 2, 3 is a difference in construction, and then types 4, 5, 6 would be differences in how those types 1, 2, 3 perform with respect to fire. And this goes on for 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and all of the modules that are currently distributed in California should be complying with this type testing right now. And then all of the systems that you're installing should be evaluated with a mounting system that has been tested with a type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 module. So the testing that's conducted for the mounting systems, there's a spread of flame test. The assembly is subject to 1400 degrees and a flame in a 12-mile-an-hour wind for 10 minutes. Meeting these Class A requirements shows that the flame has spread a maximum of 6 feet. Class B would have a larger maximum. Class C has a larger maximum still. The burning brand on the top of the module. The items here shown are the brands that are actually burnt and placed on top of this equipment. And then a burning brand between the module and the roof. The test that you're seeing here is the spread of flame test. So SnapNrack worked with Underwriters Laboratories, and we passed all of the required tests for a 2703 fire classification. In fact, achieving a Class A fire rating. Originally when we tested, it was only with the Type 1 modules. Originally when we tested, there wasn't much more available. But spread of flame, we met the Class A requirements, burning brand, top of module, and below module between roof. Class A requirements all around. Just recently, we actually achieved a Class A rating with Type 2 modules as well. And this is, again, specific to installing per the requirements of the installation manual. So UL documentation support. This is key. A lot of your success with UL products will be utilizing the documentation correctly and providing it to your AHJ for their review. Online, like I mentioned before, we have a resources page, and that it will give you the guidance and some background on all the different links and documents and collateral available to help you with permitting, help your inspectors approve these systems, help your installers install correctly, and of course, the SnapNrack Applications Engineering team is always available as well. Like we mentioned, Series 100, 200, both of these have integrated grounding listings, and they're both available online. The Series 200, being a ground-mounted system, doesn't need to meet the fire classification requirements, so there was no testing for that. And in case you were looking for, does Series 200 have all of the checkboxes that Series 100 has, it doesn't, and it shouldn't need to, because you're not going to be mounting it on a roof. And for those of you that are familiar with the Series 100 product and have been buying it for a long time, many years, and you want to transition to the UL listed product, we have a conversion sheet specifically set up to kind of help you from part number to part number what you would be buying, so that you can convert your inventory and start rolling out and transitioning to an integrated grounding or a fire classified product. Finally, when you're using the Series 100 configuration tool or the Series 200 configuration tool, there's a selection at the very top of, do you want to use the UL listed system? And that'll give you a bill of material results and design information specific to our UL listed products. Yes, great question. So the question was, does the Series 200 system, the UL listing, cover the entire space frame structural component with the 1.5-inch Galvy pipe, or is it just the racking system above that? We have evaluated the 1.5-inch Galvy pipe along with all of the pipe fittings with UL, and those have been tested and listed as including the mating components from that pipe to the rail and the rack structure. So it is all part of a listed system for integrated grounding. It includes the swivels, yeah, all the key clamps and stuff. Yes, sir. So the question was the philosophy, the basis of the fire classification and its requirements and adoption in California. What's the purpose? So the PV system mounting on a roofing system that has a certain fire rating, that PV system has the ability to propagate flame, to worsen the effect, and actually reduce the intended fire retarded effect of a roofing system. So because of that potential increased propagation and agitation, UL has required that this be evaluated. But I think I'd like Bill Brooks to actually provide maybe a more detailed response to that.
Yeah, I certainly understand the question and the concern. By the way, I just looked it up. The melting point of aluminum is 1,221 degrees. It is below the fire temperature. That's why you can melt your beer cans in the fire at your campfire site. So everybody's done that, right? That's really not the issue. The issue is PV modules. The internals of a PV module are extremely flammable. In fact, they're like solid gasoline. And we'll probably change that over time, but right now it's working well for us as far as lasting a long time, so we don't want to change if we don't have to change. And so these tests were developed over 5 years of testing to address concerns about that. And so there are many, many reports, hundreds of tests that have gone into this, and had we not actually made some pretty significant changes to the test methodology, we wouldn't have any product on the market right now that would actually pass. So I was the chair of the committee that set this requirements up. It was not an easy process. It was not a painless process at all. And quite frankly, if you want a fair world, then you need to find another planet. So So it is what it is, and we as an industry have to respond to that, and we have. And so, companies like SnapNrack have stepped up and had their products evaluated. And this goes for the bonding and grounding stuff as well. Having to chair the bonding and grounding committee for UL 1703 with the module standard, as well as the fire performance standard. These are pretty critical issues, and the benefits that we're getting out of this stuff and following the directions and all these parts that he's talking about, compared to where we used to be and where things were in the bonding and grounding world, they're worlds different and better. And so, one of the things I do want to stress, him going through all these details and all, don't get an attitude about this, because this is a big improvement. And in fact, you're talking about having a single lug on an array, compared to the BS of putting a frickin' lug on every dang module, which was stupidest thing in the world, by the way, and running copper all over an aluminum array, which is the stupidest thing in the world. So we should have done this 20 years ago, sure, okay, fine, but we're here now, and we're doing it now. And so, forget about the past, move forward, take these products and use them, and really go to the detail of providing your local jurisdictions with the information, showing them how you put it together, making them aware of how this is done right, so that we move forward as an industry and make it better and better. And is this the end of the story? This isn't even close to the end of the story. We're going to have better and better systems. We need to have systems that it's impossible to get it wrong. That's what we need. We need to have systems where the pieces and parts that go together, you just can't get it wrong. And because bonding and grounding is a very, very important part of the process. It's really a focus of most jurisdictions. They don't know much other than that a lot of times when it comes to solar. And they've also been used to seeing these stupid ground wires all over the system, and so it's definitely incumbent upon the installer to really clearly go through this, and also to educate local jurisdictions as to the benefit of these things. One of the things that hasn't been talked about here is the fact that these types of bonding systems are enormously better than the old way of doing it. I just finished an evaluation with a competitor of SnapNrack on a different type of a system, but a similar kind of idea of bonding 2703 system. And we tested and evaluated using a ground wire versus using the bonded system to evaluate the resistance of the circuit to earth, to determine how good the grounding was. And the circuit using the ground wire, the bare ground wire, old school way, had 30 times more resistance than the bonded system did. Okay, 30 times more resistance. Okay, so this is enormously improved grounding and bonding, as well as quicker, better, not having any copper and aluminum touching each other all over the place, which is not a good thing. And so it's not intuitively obvious to an inspector. They like to see ground wires for whatever reason, and so this is definitely a paradigm shift for them and an education process to show that this is not only you're not doing this to cut corners, for instance. What are you doing this for? Is this how this is to make it better and better, and to make it cleaner too, because copper wire all over the place is one of the hardest things to hide. It's one of the things that makes things look really bad, if the copper wire isn't tucked up neatly, and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and so providing that information to your authority having jurisdiction, don't get an attitude about it. Make sure that you have the documentation there. As was saying, make sure your stupid little bags don't get pissed off about having those things there. That's part of the deal. and that's part of the process. And soon enough, in the next couple of years, authorities having jurisdiction are going to get really familiar with these products, and then they're going to be like, oh yeah, no problem, whatever. I don't need to see those bags. Yeah. I see you got all this stuff here. It's not going to be a big deal, but it's a transition period, and you're going to have to just deal with that and kind of look to the future that this is where we have to go. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. A couple more questions.
Yeah, so the question was about training for determining what the class rating of the existing roof is. And just for clarification, that's not a requirement of the code. The code requires that you put a PV system on a roof that is equal to the required classification in that area. So you could have, for instance, I mean, it seems crazy, but we're talking about what the code says. We could have a shake roof, all right, that was grandfathered in a high fire severity area, okay, and that requires a Class A roof system. Now, that grandfathered roof isn't anywhere near a Class A roof, and we know that for a fact. In fact, it's not even a Class C roof, it's kindling. So shouldn't even be allowed, but it's grandfathered. But we're going to put a Class A PV system on top of that roof because that's what's required by the code. Now, at the same time, it seems kind of silly to do that without re-roofing that roof because it's a frickin' shake roof. And we should outlaw those things. But that's not what the code says. The code doesn't require us to do that. And so we would be allowed to install a Class A PV system on kindling wood. And so it's really important because to determine the fire class rating of an existing roof in residential is probably not that hard because for asphalt shingles, we haven't manufactured anything but Class A asphalt shingles for about 20 years. Okay, so anything that's been re-roofed in the last 20 years is going to be Class A to start with. With commercial roofs, it's an absolute nightmare to determine the fire class rating of a roof because it would require engineers to come out, cut sections out of the roof, verify it, and make sure they found all the labels on stuff, which you can't find, and all that kind of stuff. So you do not want to go there, and in the code, we're not going to go there. If you want to know a little more about this whole process, CalCEA has a nice website that they've set up, and it's calcea.org/UL1703, really easy. And then that's got a whole rundown of the fire class rating stuff. There's a link there to this NREL document that I wrote on the subject, which gives background and has information on what installers should be doing, what rack manufacturers should be doing, what module manufacturers should be doing in this area. And there's great links to SnapNrack and other companies' fire rating stuff. So it's the only website you can go to that has a complete list or a relatively complete list of the products that are available on the market that are fire class rated. You do not want to go there. Let's just put it that way. Bonding a metal roof is right next to impossible. And so until that day comes when we have to do something like that, don't even go there because there's a lot of reasons why that is true. On a residential metal roof, it's probably not that hard when you have continuous pans that go from the ridge to the eave. Then you could bond along the ridge, and we've seen that being required. But on a large building where you've got multiple pans, there's no way to bond between the pans. There's no bonding system between the pans. And so there's no way that you can get continuity from the top to the bottom of a metal roof. Now, you got lots and lots of fasteners, and those things probably attach to building. If they're drilled into building steel, probably bond, but there's no listing process for that. There are no bonding lugs for that. There are no bonding products on the market for that purpose. There are companies that do lightning protection that do bonding of metal roofs, but they run into those exact same problems. And the only place that you can actually legally bond a a treated metal roof would be at the ridge, because you would be destroying the warranty on the roof if you damage the roof anywhere else. So you take a Galvalume roof or anything like that with a coating on it, as soon as you break the coating on that the warranty's gone. So don't go there. And if you have AHJs that want to go there, because we do run into that, it's a quagmire that you will never get out of. And so the only thing you could do is recommend and suggest a look-away pass that says, I'm going to put bonding lugs along the top pans under my ridge cap, and hope they don't ask any more questions. Because if they do, there's no way to do it. I mean, we're talking about all the trouble and everything that it took to get 2703 together. It's an equal and greater proposition to do bonding of metal roofs, and that hasn't even been started. So, fight the right battles. There is no requirement to bond them. Okay, so the electrical code. So here's where it gets a little bit interesting. The electrical code requires us to bond metal likely to become energized. Okay, and so what's that? Lightning on a metal roof? Well, like I said, lightning protection companies will bond metal roofs. In the process of bonding that metal roof, they'll probably violate the warranty of that roof when they do that. And so then it's up to the owner. Do you care more about lightning, or do you care more about the roof warranty? Okay, so that's one issue. But as far as to say that to make the judgment call, the code does not say that if you have PV modules on a metal roof, you must bond the metal roof. That's a judgment call by the AHJ, and they're saying that that roof is now likely to become energized. The only time a metal roof would become likely to become energized is we've seen it happen with fires, things like that. And so it's also, metal roofing materials and all that are generally out of reach. And because they're out of reach, it's like having a metal structure that's out of reach. We would not necessarily be required to bond that either. And so these are all gray areas in the code. There's nothing specific there. And so the problem is that if you cross the gray area and you go into saying you must, you also have to understand that you've put yourself in a position where you can't. So the reason it's a gray area is because you can't. And so come back to what, keep the focus of the AHJ on what you can do. This is what you can do. This is what's right. And this is the metal that's likely to become energized. Is the metal frame of a module likely to become energized? Absolutely. Okay. Is anything that touches the wiring likely to become energized? Yes. Okay. Beyond that, let's not talk about details of other things. Keep it simple.
Thanks again, Bill. Thank you for your time. And Bill Brooks will be up here shortly with his NEC review.